All right, I've got a little homeowner hack if you're painting your kitchen where your countertop meets the actual wall. There's often a gap. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a gap there along the side. Let's take a look over here. There, you can kind of see this gap right here. It's really hard to fill that with caulking without spreading it on top of the countertop and not getting it all over the wall. So I'm going to show you how you can do this as a finishing touch, or you can do it before you roll your second coat. What you're going to need for this is you're going to need your tape. You need a little putty knife for cutting straight edges on the tape. You're going to need your caulking, non-siliconized if you can, paintable, and then a wet rag. Always start at one end and then overlap going another way. And then overlap, carry on. I'm going to tuck that down a little bit hard. And then carry on until you finish. That's where I'm going to finish right there. And then I'm going to start here and I'm going to go to this corner and then I'm going to go all the way to this corner. What you want is you want the caulking to bind not only to the top of the countertop, but also to the wall. So if I was to tape that right up into that crack, then there's a good chance that the caulking will not bridge the wall and that. So what I do is I always stay about 1 millimeter or 2, depending on the size of the gap, away from the wall. It's kind of hard to see with that shadow. But as you can see, I stay 1 millimeter away so I can still see a little bit of the countertop because I want the caulking to fill that gap. Now when I come to a corner, this is where you use that little putty knife because it's got a really 90-degree angle edge. So whenever I pull my tape, I always rip it with a little bit extra so that I can pull that off. So what I do is I tack it down right nice and tight to the corner, nice and flat. I then grab this carefully, put pressure down, and I cut it and I rip it like that. That gives it a nice, clean, straight edge. So I started over here and I'm going to finish right there. So you want to go back over all your work and just make sure that the actual tape is stuck and it's sticky. You don't want it to be loose in any way. So what you want to do here is you want to put just a little bead of caulking. You don't want too much, but just enough. Now keep in mind, if you're doing this a different dark color, you might want dark caulking just to match a little bit better. But really what I'm doing here is I'm just putting a little bead of caulking. Not much, just enough. What it does is it acts as a bridge or a barrier or a buffer between the tape and the paint so that when you paint it, it allows you to pull the tape perfectly without having any lines. Now there is a tape called frog tape that you can buy at the store, and it does something very similar to this where you don't have to use the caulking. However, I find it doesn't always work. This is just a painter's hack. So I'm going to go ahead and caulk the rest of this. Then I'm going to basically grab my finger, a wet finger with a wet rag, and I'm just going to spread it on there. You see how it's not too much, but you see how the caulking actually touches the tape and the wall and fills the gap at the same time. So now that the taping is done and the caulking is done, you can see that I filled the gap. The caulking is touching the tape and it's touching the wall. I've done it everywhere. Again, you kind of want to keep in mind that you got to move fast with caulking, otherwise it'll dry and it'll defeat the purpose of this tip. So now that that's done, I'm going to use a 1.5 inch brush. Now this is a very small brush, but I just want to create a little tiny line there. I just want to paint the little tiny line. And technically you should cut first and then roll your walls. However, this is a job that's done after the fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my brush and a little bit of paint to paint that line in and try and make a really nice smooth edge. So the trick here is I've got my wall paint, is that the first tip is that you want to have enough paint on your brush. So you want to put the brush on the caulking and wipe it one way. You don't want to jab it, you don't want to jab it because it'll disrupt the caulking. You want to start at one end, apply the paint, and wipe it around. Rule number one is you get lots of paint on your brush. You see how there's quite a bit of paint on the end of that brush there? That's what you want. You don't want a dry brush. So what you do is, I always start in the corners, gently kind of place it in there and then pull it back. And then unload your brush. And I just want to get that top edge a little bit, nice and gently. I don't want to do this too many times, just enough, just once or twice. So I always start in the corners because that's the hardest place, and that's where you're going to disrupt the paint and the caulking the most. So, as you can see, I put quite a bit of paint on there. I touched the wall and I touched the tape. You can see how thick that is. So I'm going to continue and do the rest of it. It's taped, it's caulked, it's painted, and it's starting to dry. You don't want it to dry. You want it to get it while it's wet. You can see that it's still wet. So what you want to do is you want to grab this and you want to pull away. And what I do is I pull away at a 45. You see? Look how straight that line is. Look at that. And then I pull it. And as I pull it, it's perfectly straight. And you come to the corner, you want to make sure that you grab it in the corner and you pull the opposite way. Now keep in mind that you're gonna have a big bundle of tape. It's wet, it's got caulking all over it. So best thing to do is to grab it little lengths of 1 foot and bundle it up like this. Therefore you have control of it, and then you can put it straight in the garbage. All right, now it's done. You've got a caulked line, you've got a painted line, and it's straight. Again, I didn't bleed too much up onto the wall. Probably going to see a little bit of a cut line there anyways. Beautiful. And the last thing is, because it's done around a sink, I will try to not use that sink for at least 6 to 10 hours because you don't want water splashing up onto it. That's the last thing you want. It's acrylic latex, it washes with water, so that does not mix. So whenever you're painting, try not to use water in those areas for at least 6 to 8 hours, and the longer the better. So that's how you tape caulk your countertop so that you can get rid of that gap, caulk it, and paint it all in one.